Hello, I'm Anthony. Halion 7.1 has recently been released, and the biggest new feature is an overhaul and enhancement of the Spectral synthesizer. The Spectral synthesizer itself was a zone that was introduced with Halion 7. Now, I've already made a video as part of my Halion 7 series discussing the Spectral synthesizer. I'll put a link to that above and in the description. That gives you a really good overview of spectral synthesis in general and its original implementation in Halion 7. What we're going to look at today are the enhancements, the new features that have been introduced with 7.1. What I've done here is I've initialized a spectral synthesizer using this option from the slot rack, and I've loaded in this sample from the media bay. Here's the raw sample completely unprocessed. There's been a realignment of some of the controls in the spectral synth. The purity and inharmonicity have been moved over into the FX tab, but the new feature for 7.1 is called blur. Let's turn that on. What we get is this hazy purple map. What you're seeing here is a single momentary snapshot. There's a little white line over here. Once again, I've described all of this in my basic video, but as I drag this white line across, we're seeing different moments in time, but when I press the key, you're going to hear the entire sample played back. And you can see those strobing white lines go across the screen as the sample's played. What we get with the blurring feature is, well, the manual describes it something akin to chorus. To my ears, it actually sounds a little bit more like rotary speaker. It's quite a unique sort of sound, and we basically get to it from the blur depth. You can see that it's set at 5% initially, so I'll turn it off and we'll kind of center our ears. There's the simple sound on its own. Now I'll bring in the blur, and you immediately get kind of a warm shimmer. If I turn it up, it becomes far more distinct. I've just noticed there's a little sample pop there. It's because I'm not playing the sample back from the very beginning. The easiest way to get rid of that is I'll just jump very quickly over to the envelope and put a tiny 8 millisecond attack on the sound. It's just going to get rid of that little sample pop. That's nicer. Now, as I've been playing with this blur control over the past few days, I'm coming to the conclusion that anywhere kind of less than 20 is the sweet spot for kind of general FX laden sound. Above that, you're into sound effects territory. Because what it's doing is it's applying a quite radical kind of randomized frequency modulation to the sound, as represented by this purple haze. Effectively, it's blurring the sample exactly as it describes. You're not exactly sure what you're going to get. If I take the effect to its absolute limit, in fact, let's set it to 100%, and I'm going to take all of the dry sound away as well. So now we're only hearing the blur effect. And now we're into genuine kind of out and out sound effects. Which is fine if you're generating sound effects. But as I say, 10 to 20, you're going to get a much more usable sound. Then we bring some of the original dry sound back. It defaults to 50%, this control. If I press Control click, you can see that the default is to kind of have half the original spectral sample plus the blur effect. It's also quite good fun playing with the speed of playback of this oscillator, because this sample is reasonably short, not getting much time to play with it. So I'm going to slow the playback of the sample down from the oscillator tab. I'm just going to pull the speed down. Now the playback will be slower, but we're still getting the sample played at the right pitch, obviously. Now I can play a little bit with the time control in the blurring. This is effectively like an attack. Treat it like an attack where it's introducing this blurring effect over time. If I make the FX 100% so that we're only hearing the effect and bring the time down to 0, and then turn the time up, you can hear that kind of fade in effect as that blurring is introduced, and then mix back in the original signal, which is always dry, obviously. I've reinitialized my Spectrum control and I've loaded in a new sample now. This is a nice simple guitar string sample. And it sounds like that. And as you can see, a very straightforward, very linear map. So there's very little modulation in this sound itself. Before we go on to have a look at some of the features in the multi-tab, I'll just send this through the blur effect very quickly. And that's with a very gentle depth. Bring it up a bit. Much more violent frequency modulation. Now I'm going to introduce multiple copies of that sound from the multi-tab. Now one of the features of the multi-tab did already exist. The unison mode was in 7.0. Today we're going to concentrate on the stack mode. Stack mode gives you 8 copies of the sound that you can change their pitch and pan settings dynamically. So by default you get the original pitch. If I bring up the volume slider for the octave, and then some perfect fifth, and you can change those intervals to taste. So we make that a perfect fourth. Obviously the notes that I'm playing would need to be in key. I'm not really keeping a track of everything that's supposed to be in C minor here, but obviously paying a little bit more attention to your intervals in the context of the thing that you're playing is going to be pretty important. We can also engage pan settings. The manual says be careful about this because it introduces CPU overhead. Well, we're not going to worry about that today. Let's just crank everything up anyway. Let's get that back on perfect fifth duty. Oh, let's throw the kitchen sink at it. Why not? Biblical. Now I'm going to throw most of these away again so that I can show you what the pure control does. This isn't something you need to worry about desperately. So I've got my original tone plus a perfect fifth. And you can see that every harmonic has a duplicate. So these two notes here are the fundamentals. By default it's operating in equal temperament, which means these harmonic offsets are slightly adjusted to account for the fact that we need to be able to play them on the keys of a piano. You can set the analysis engine to just intonation instead by engaging pure. Now in the case of a perfect fifth, you're going to hear basically no difference. If I set this perfect fifth to a tritone, however, the tritone in equal temperament is the interval that's the furthest away from its kind of perfect version from the harmonic series. What you'll see is the peak representing the tritone just shift slightly when I switch between equal temperament and just intonation. Watch this peak here. It's really subtle. The only reason you're going to want to engage this is if you're dealing with samples that are very heavily dependent on the harmonic series, like sawtooth squares, triangle waves, things that are just pure multiples of the harmonic series. If you make these pitch adjustments in equal temperament, they're basically going to go very slightly out as opposed to where they're supposed to be. I can fairly safely say you don't really need to worry about the pure button. It's a very, very minor or subtle adjustment. And the majority of the time when you're playing in this thing, you're going to be using fairly complex waves anyway. So leaving the pure disengaged is going to be fine. Finally, today we're going to have a look at an enhancement of the Formant engine. I've loaded up a vocal sample here. And I'm just going to pick on one phrase. So I'm going to move my position control so that we're just going to get this second phrase, so that I can demonstrate what Formant's all about. Now, if I play a simple phrase, I've only gone up a perfect fourth there, and it's already starting to sound munchkinized. It doesn't sound natural because the entire sound has been shifted 5 semitones. The vowel sounds that we make as humans have fixed and identifiable frequency bumps, and they're called formants. Each vowel sound, in fact, pretty much every sound that we make, but predominantly vowels, have very strong formants, these certain frequencies that push through regardless of the pitch that gets played. When we shift the entire pitch of a sound, that's what sounds unnatural and weird to us, because these formants have also been shifted. What the formant control in Halion allows us to do is to stabilize some of those fixed pitches, move the pitch of the kind of the underlying sound, but keep that breathy effect of the vowel itself. So let's concentrate on this F. So that's just the simple sample played back 5 semitones higher. Now when I engage formant, and if I shift the scale, I'm basically toying with those formants behind the scenes to disconnect them from the underlying frequency. And that sounds much more natural than with the formant disengaged. Now, over on the analysis tab, we've got some new features that concentrate specifically on the formant. Now, if I move my position marker so that we're actually in the phrase, you can see the phrase being sung. And this is where Halion does a lot of the heavy lifting for you, because these default range controls starting at 500 Hz are kind of reasonable. What we're really looking to do is to leave the fundamental alone. We basically want to let that shift in pitch as we play different keys. But the usable formant range of the vowels that we make typically lie, well, somewhere between, it can go as low as 250 Hz depending on the note that's being sung. But the high frequency usually tails off somewhere between 2 and 3 kilohertz. All of this is salt to taste. We have to press the note to find out what we're doing. But if I shift the range over which the formants are fixed, depending on the vowel sound that's being made and the pitch at which it's being sung, I can really tailor quite a finely controlled sound for that particular effect. It's only going to work over a fairly small range, and it's entirely dependent on the sample. But that's the whole point of having this stuff. It gives you the flexibility to really focus in and try to get that pitch shifted note to sound as good as possible relative to the originally played sample. To finish off today and to bring all of these enhancements together, I've just loaded up the guitar string sample again, and I'm just going to have a bit of a play with it and see what's the most interesting sound I can get within a couple of minutes. And that's my starting point. Let's start off with some blurring. Stack a little bit of perfect fifth in. I want to turn it into a bit more of a pad, so I'm going to slow it down a bit. I'm going to soften the attack a little bit by bringing the position to the point where the sample's already playing. Give myself a bit of attack. Taking off some of the edge. Back over to the synth engine. Dial that purity back a little bit to add a bit of extra harshness. And that's a pretty good working pad sound in not much time at all. Hope you enjoyed the video today. Please hit like if you did. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the Patreon and channel member links below if you'd like to help support my channel. Thanks very much. I'll see you next time.